Sure. All right. Hey, welcome to episode 32 of the PHP Town Hall. You have myself, Ben Edmonds, along with Phil Sturgeon,
Hello.
and no guest tonight, so it's all us all the time. I
No.
hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, we tried getting the guests on about 4 times, and it hasn't worked out. Partly my fault, partly their fault, taking it in turns to mess it up. But we're just going to do a little Ben and Phil episode, just to chat about stuff that's going on in the PHP world. That's what we do.
The best episode ever.
Yeah.
No pesky guests to get in the way of us talking.
in the way of me talking.
That's true. I just like the look of myself on the camera.
Yeah, it's a pretty face.
Mm-hmm.
So what the hell are we talking about tonight, Ben? What's going on?
All right, so I typed a bunch of stuff in chat, but then I lost it all.
Well, actually,
So-
an interesting start might be you were just saying off camera that off air, whatever, a minute ago that you're kind of more management now, and you're not writing as much code. Tell me about what's going on with your work situation.
Yeah, so it's a weird transition. I took over CTO spot for my company a couple months ago, I guess. And I still have this pipe dream in my head that eventually, once I get everything under control, I'll be able to code again. Which, I mean, I do code now, maybe half the time, a little less today. But, yeah, it's been a weird, handling client calls, talking to people all day, more like helping other people get shit done. So it's cool. It's fun. I hate it some days. I like it some days. It's just different.
Yeah, man. Well, when I was CTOing for Capture, the company that no longer exists, I actually kind of enjoyed it. I enjoyed, like, after you've been coding for 10 years doing the same stuff, there's only so many different times you can write a form that accepts input, and then like write an API which is the same as a form just without the HTML and all that stuff. And like
Yeah.
you even get to do more interesting things like systems architecting, where you're building out all these remote service-based architectures and use AWS and load balancing and all this other shit. You can always learn other things, but eventually you kind of have done it all, and it's really boring. And I got to the point where I actually preferred saying this code needs to be written in this general sort of way. You go make that, and I'll check in with you in a couple of days. And then you give like 5 different people challenges and things that they need to write, and then they write it, and you click merge, and you get the same feeling as if you did it, but they've just done it for you, and you didn't have to write all that code.
Yeah, a really cool thing too, like I didn't expect, but people come to me when they can't figure something out usually. And so I get all the hard problems without any of the boring stuff usually. Right? So I
Yeah.
figure out how to get past the problem, and then I send them off to go implement it completely. So that part is fun. It's
It's
more
like
the
the
parts
highlights.
with clients that gets old.
It's like the highlights.
Yeah, exactly.
All the goals, none of the running about the field.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually coming back the other way now. So this new job I'm starting is technically a lower role. It's kind of like a demotion, but I get more money, and that's the main thing. And
That's all that matters in life.
of course, especially with an apartment that I can't get rid of. And yeah, so I'm going from CTO of a small company that only had like 9 of us to like a senior software engineer, which is it's kind of like two roles down, because I'm not really lead of anything at the minute. I mean, I assume at some point I'll be, because we have loads of APIs and services and different things like that, we'll have like teams assigned to each one, so I'll probably be leading a small team on one specific service eventually. But it is a bit of a step back, and I don't know, I think it's just always nice to change it up a little bit, have like some time where you're doing mostly management, sometime when you're writing code. It's whichever way you do it, you kind of get bored of the one and want the other. So I'm happy to go back to actively actually building shit now.
Yeah, that's cool. So, actually, what's the company? I know it's Ride, but I don't really know anything about them.
Right. So there's a company called VRide and a company called Ride. So VRide is a 20-year-old B2B carpooling service system, kind of, where basically they go to a big company and say, we can help you implement carpooling for your company, and we can help you like pair and match up all the people that should share cars. I think they actually supply cars in some instances if there's one person that could drive but they don't have a car, and then everyone kind of chips in and they just kind of manage that stuff for them. Trouble is, as it's 20 years old, the entire system is like fax machines and phone calls and memos, which
Oh,
is,
wow.
yeah, that's nice and fun. So,
Hmm.
VRide is that older, larger parent company, and then Ride is a small startup they've kind of built on the side of that. So it's technically a startup. That might just be misusing the word, and I do hate to misuse the word, but it's a small company that essentially has that startup culture, and the only funder and investor is the parent company. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. The CTO is Oscar Salazar from Uber,
Yep.
so that's going to be quite impressive.
That's
And
cool.
we've got it's got like quite an all-star team. We have a core contributor to Ember.js, a core contributor to Rails, and a few other kind of high-level folks, and me, which is fun. And yeah, we're replacing their old shitty telephone fax memo system with a really cool iPhone and Android app. So
So what's like the new stack?
they did have like it was all one massive Rails app, and that
Hmm.
was terrible. So now what they're doing is there's going to be a Rails API in the middle, which I will be one of two developers working on. We've got a few other services. I don't know where they're hosting it. I know that staging's on Heroku, and then light production is on like Host Dynamic or something, which sounds a bit scary. I'll be looking at trying to make them both the same as soon as possible, but
GoDaddy. It's probably on GoDaddy.
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, well, so it's not like AWS or anything. It's just kind of Heroku and then something fairly similar. And yeah, there's gonna be a lot of Ruby initially, I think, but we have to get this launched by like middle of November, version 1. There's already people that have started on it, and it's like I don't know, a third done or something. But I think it's gonna be a case of just smash it out and get it done, and then go back and rewrite some stuff in Go to make it faster or whatever the hell we end up doing. But um, what is that noise in the background? Is someone vacuuming?
I was trying to mute it. It's the garage door. I'm pretty much right above the garage in this room.
Nice. I'll tell you a funny little story about rewriting things in Go. I was chatting to Zach Kitzmiller, regular guest, who we need to get back on. I don't know why we haven't had him on. But at SeatGeek, their company, they have loads of services. So they have like 25 of these random different HTTP services. They have one which is just for tiles, where if you need to, when you're buying tickets for a stadium or for a concert, they'll show you where each specific ticket is on the map, and they have these like graphics of all the seats and the rows and everything else. And the system that layers the tiles on top of on the page, and that gets all the right tiles and puts things in place. That's a HTTP service that you just call a URL and it responds. So I've got a really itchy nose. I'm just going to have to scratch this because it's doing my head in. There we go. So they have that system, and it was all built with like Symfony 1 or something, which is terrible. But their application, their service took 7 seconds to respond. They went through and removed all of the anonymous functions and closures and things like that, and changed it to use just like actual hard-coded functions. And that took it from 7 seconds to 5 seconds, which is crazy. I don't know how that optimization really worked. But then after that, they were like, this still isn't fast enough. 5 seconds is still far too slow for what's happening. So they messed around and rewrote it in Go, and it took 400 milliseconds to do the exact same thing.
Holy shit!
Which is crazy. Now you can definitely argue
Wow.
that the Symfony version was built badly, or maybe it was Symfony or something else. But it would be quite hard for me to imagine doing something like that and being that fast in PHP. Depends on how you approach it, but I thought that was really hilarious. And the funny punchline to that as well is that the service actually responds so quickly that it messes up the promises in the front end JavaScript. So
Oh, nice.
they actually had to put sleep 1 second at the end of the response just to slow it down long enough for JavaScript to know what's going on. So that's kind of the
Oh,
beauty.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the
So
beauty.
do you use Go? It's compiled, right? And it's more distributed.
Yeah.
That's kind of its thing, right?
Yeah, you compile it and it's got a HTTP server built in, so kind of like the PHP dev server, but a little bit more advanced. So you compile it and then it's got a server built in. You don't need to patch your Nginx, and that'll knock off like 20% just right there. So yeah, that's one of the beauties of doing service-oriented architectures. So when you have, instead of building everything with Laravel or Symfony or Rails, instead of building everything into one app, you're gonna have all these separate little parts here and there that are spread out. And then if one of them's kind of slow, you can just completely replace that one. And if you're using HTTP as an interface, then you can still output the same JSON and still accept the same query parameters, but you can rewrite it in fucking Spring or Erlang or whatever the hell happens to be quicker for the thing you're doing. So that's a lot of what we're going to be doing at Ride. But for now, it literally is just most of them are Rails and Ember.js guys. So it's going to be all Rails and Ember.js, and then eventually at some point we'll research how to make other bits quicker. So I get to mess around with Erlang or whatever. Hello. I ran out of things there, but no. So the other fun thing about the job is that we're starting it in Colombia. So in 3 days, I'm getting on a plane and going to Colombia. It's going to be. I imagine that I'm going to be.
Man.
That's all right. I imagine that I'm going to be very efficient because with all that cocaine and coffee, it's going to be great.
So does cocaine get absorbed as well as it gets absorbed through your nose?
Sorry. Your sound's messing up there, man.
How about now?
Yeah, you're good.
Mic closer. Does cocaine get absorbed, when you stick it everywhere else versus when you put it in your nose?
I think you pretty much put that anywhere in your body and it'll do the job.
All right. Yeah. So you should have a good time. On your way back.
do not condone drugs. Do not condone drinking either. Always drink responsibly.
Yeah. Drinking and cocaine are both horribly amazing and bad.
Wow. So that's something we didn't need to do. It's a good thing. It's a good thing we don't have any sponsors on this show because they'd be like, "Yeah, you're promoting drug use, therefore we cut your funding."
We could totally get some beer company to sponsor us, I think.
Well, I should probably try and get Angry Orchard to sponsor. That'd be
That would be critical for
Angry Orchard. Angry Orchard. Some of their ciders aren't completely shit. How was that for an
Blue Moon is the best beer at 7-Eleven.
Blue Moon, because I guess. Great. So yeah, that's a new job. Not going to be doing that much PHP, which I'm kind of fine with. I like to, do random stuff. And the last job was a lot of Python anyway. But I am actually wondering where my PHP development is going to be now because I always had PyroCMS that I needed to develop PHP for. And that was a lot of the reason why I was involved with things like the Fig and PHP, the PHP League, all of these projects trying to help and improve the PHP scene, ecosystem, community in general. Because if I was part of it, I wanted to make it better. But now that I've sold PyroCMS and my main job isn't going to be using it, I'm kind of wondering where I'm going to be doing my PHP development, if at all. So that's an interesting.
So this year kind of. I'm going to Rails now speech. Is that what's happening?
I'm not going to be moving to Rails happily. I will be trying to convince them to use anything else, but having a core Rails developer on the team probably means that we're going to lose that battle.
That probably means you're going to be the shitty dev on the team.
That's exactly what I know is going to happen. I'm going to go on there, and this guy's going to be like, who is this fucking idiot that they brought in? He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know about how, anything to do with Rails. I used Rails 3 quite a lot about 4 years ago, but apart from that, it's going to be interesting.
I've used it off and on, but it's such a beast. If you're not in there every day, there's so many little caveats you don't know about. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it might be a silly and potentially overused example by me, but it might also be completely outdated. But when you use that ORM, you can't manually set the created app date. The created app date is just right now, and you can't change that. And I was like, what the fuck? Why can't I say, if I'm importing tweets or something, or previous events, I want to say this was done then, and set the created app date. And people just said, no, you just make a new date field, and you call posted app. I'm like, ugh, so annoying. And that's fine. If you know that rule, then you build your code, and it's fine. If you don't know that rule, you can spend an entire afternoon coding everything around created app, and then once you run the import, you find out it doesn't fucking work. It's and there's just hundreds of those things that I suppose I'll have to get used to. And if I'm sat next to a core contributor, then I'll be like, hey guy, tell me the answer to this question, and it'll be fine. But
that poor guy's not going to get anything done ever again.
Right. But the only way that we're going to hit our November deadline is if we fire Phil, or at least send him on holiday.
Can we just buy some duct tape for his mouth, and then we'll be good.
Yeah, man. Huh. But I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty excited being part of projects like the Fig and stuff, and I don't really plan on quitting. But if I don't end up doing any PHP work for a while, then it might be a bit weird trying to stay involved.
Well, I'd be surprised if you don't pick up some open source work. I mean, that's kind of you get bored and you do open source. It's kind of what you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there'll still be kind of consulting and probably personal projects, but things like Fractal, like that's the last piece of code I've released, and I've only released probably one package this year. When I was still doing Coding Master, I was releasing one library every bloody week, but I've only released Fractal, and that's it because I used PHP at the last job, and Fractal was something I needed for my job, so I made it. And if we're not using any PHP, then I will still be doing open source, but I don't know if it'll be PHP, I suppose. I mean, I wasn't really planning on coming on this podcast and being like, I quit, but because I'm not. But I don't know what I will be doing with PHP right now. I'll probably, maybe fuck around in the evenings doing some personal project, but even then, I'd rather mess around with, if I'm doing a mess around project, it'd be like, let's do it in Go or Python or something, just because it's a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get you there. I haven't really done any open source PHP work that's, anything to speak of since CodeIgniter days. It's kind of, in CodeIgniter, there was so much that needed to be done. There was so much out there that you needed, right? But nowadays, it seems like anything I could think of that I might need, someone's already built, and they put more work into it than I ever would. So it's, there's less opportunity there, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of opportunity to make good quality packages, because although we've had 2 years of people building really good, tested, standards-based, good quality packages, there's still not quite enough. And you come across certain things, like we were discussing last time, about how there's just no good Twitter client. They're all awful. And other kind of random things that it does. I mean, there's a lot of room left. I think there's a lot of room for people to build good quality asynchronous-based packages instead of the whole PHP way. All the components are read the entire file, process the 1 gig, output the entire file. Like, I have to make 10 requests. Well, you better wait for each one, or batch them and do nothing with the response. Like, there's so much room for asynchronous stuff to be done in PHP that I think is where you can build stuff that's new and interesting. But at the same time,
yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Personally, it's been hard to get excited about async in PHP, just because I also do a lot of Node, so it's kind of best tool for the job. But I get why it's better for some people and companies, because if you already have a bunch of PHP, you already have PHP developers, why not stay with that?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Personally, it's been hard to get too excited about that, because I feel like all my async needs are pretty much met with Node.
Yeah, I mean, the only downside there is that you are using Node.
That is a big downside.
Why aren't they version 1 yet? God damn it, just tag it as version 1. Like, I keep hearing people say that the Node team are essentially saying that they aren't planning on doing anything much more with it. Like, they've got their platform, they're happy with that platform, they're not going to rewrite it tomorrow, it's not going to be anything else. So just call it version 1, just release it.
It's going to be like Gmail, where it's like 10 years later, no one cares anymore, and then it's out of beta.
Yeah, it's just I don't know that it matters per se, but it is still. It just kind of frustrates me. It's been out for years, and it's just like just tag it, just get it done.
Like every big company in the fucking world uses it, and it's still not 1.0.
Right. We could even, as long as they don't do something like Chef or Salt, where they're just like 0.1, 0.2, 0.10, 0.11, 12.
Maybe their first version is going to be like 10. They're just forget all the other shit.
That's what Chef did, and a bunch of other companies have done that. Like, no one will take us seriously if we're only version 1, because they're on version 5. We've got to be version 7. I'm like, for fuck's sake. But yeah, whatever. I have previously maybe complained about version numbers too much in the past, and don't need to do that again. Yeah. Anyway.
So really, speaking of your job, you have a lot of like weird travel, and you're going to be a drug mule for a while, as we kind of alluded to.
Yeah.
So, what all trips do you have coming up? I know you're in like Colombia and then Argentina or something.
Things are getting real weird over the next month and a half. So with the new job, there's a lot of people from all over the world. There's a lot of people from South America and Central America, and I think the plan is to get everyone into the same place at some point. But we're having like an immersion trip where basically we're all going to get
It
everyone together.
sounds very BSy.
I mean,
Immersion.
the word immersion might be, but basically we're all going to go hang out we'll start off in Colombia, so I'm flying there on the 6th in a couple of days, which will probably be last month if you're listening to this on iTunes. Yeah, so we're going to Colombia, and then we're there, and I don't know how to say any of the names of these places, so I'm going to sound like a fucking idiot. But we're going to Bogota, and then there's another place called Medellin, so 2 different cities in Colombia. Then
You're English, so you don't never say any words properly. It's all right.
Aluminum. Yeah, so we're doing that. Then I need to go and pick up my visa somewhere because we're sent off for my new visa, my new O1, and I might have to go to Canada to pick that up because I have to go somewhere where they have a U.S. embassy. I'm not allowed into America, so there was talk about me maybe going to Canada because it's just closer than England.
Are you speaking at True North? Are you?
No.
Oh,
I couldn't cope with any more conferences during this weird period.
I was thinking that'd be good timing though, because that's in 5 weeks or something. Right?
That would have been handy, but no. So the rest of October I'll be in Colombia pretty much, or Canada. Then I come back and I'll have like a week in my apartment, and then I have to go to PHP Argentina for about 10 days, and for 2 of those days I'm getting on a ferry and sneaking over to Uruguay to do some consulting for somebody else.
Nice.
So it's a really weird trip, and everyone's like, "Oh, that sounds like a bit of a brag." I'm like, "Well, it's gonna be cool, but at the same time, I've been like moving about a lot since April, and I'm looking forward to a bit of stability so that I can like get back into cycling and get some other stuff done and write some fucking articles for my blog because I haven't done anything. And maybe be able to go on more than 2 dates with somebody before I end up kicked out of the fucking country. That would be a nice start.
Well, you are like working the whole time too, so it's not like just a fun vacation either. You know?
That's it as well. Yeah, when I tell people like, "Oh, I got flown to Spain for 2 days," everyone's like, "Ooh!" I'm like, "Yeah," and I saw the inside of the taxi, the inside of the hotel, and then the inside of the fucking taxi again.
That's how I am with like conferences are sort of okay, right? Because I'll ditch out early if I'm not speaking late or whatever. But like work trips, everybody's like, "Oh, you go to so many cool places," and I'm like, "Yeah, I go and I talk to clients for 3 days, and then I fly back on a red eye." Like, it's not exactly exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of people that kind of complain about the traveling lifestyle, and I guess I am kind of doing that a little bit, but only because the whole visa, job, housing situation has been so nuts. I have met a few conference speakers that do this as a job that are like developer advocates, and you often hear them just complaining about it all the time at conferences. I'm like, well, you've got 2 choices there. You could either maybe switch your thinking and be a bit more positive and enjoy it, or change your job. Like if you don't like it, then just don't do it. But this travel is stuff that I don't really have a choice about, and it's not entertainment. It is work and stuff. But I don't want to be too.
I think it has its good side and its bad. You know, I talk to some of the developer advocates, and I'm kind of jealous. Like, they travel all the time, and usually they work out a day or 2 after each conference to just kind of hang out in the cities if they're smart. Right? So it's cool, but I also see how like 50% time away from your family would be pretty rough at times. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like being a comedian on the road. You know, if you're not like going on the road, then maybe you just settle into a local comedy store, a local comedy venue, and you make less money, but that's that's the choice you make. So I don't want to be one of these like takes everything for granted person. I am in many ways very lucky with my career, but yeah, it's still a pain in the tits right now that I have to go and do all this stuff.
By the way, thank you to whoever just bought our bundle on LeanPub. If you want to know how to build a secure web application and a kick-ass API, check out Phil Sturgeon and Ben Edmonds.
Where did that come from?
I just got an email that we got a purchase on our bundle.
Oh, nice.
Because of this podcast.
I didn't hear the first part. The sound kind of crapped out. And it sounded like you just randomly doing an advertisement. By the way, I've got a
good opportunity.
Wow. So what have we got on our list here?
All right, so let's talk about some PHP stuff. Like, let's stop talking about us for a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, we're pretty important. We'll get back to us, right? All right, PSR 7. Let's go for that shit.
Right. So PSR 7 is the idea of standardizing, making a standardized interface for HTTP messages. So that's a message is a request or a response. And we had Boo Simmons on the show. I can never get anyone's surname right. That's an ongoing theme.
I think you got both his names wrong. It's Bo Simmons, I believe.
Bo Simmons. All right. Well, yeah. and Michael Dowling. They were both on the show quite a few episodes ago, talking about it. But since then, there's been a slight change of structure. Michael Dowling has dropped out, basically saying he doesn't believe that that interfaces are the correct way to go about doing it, and that trying to define a HTTP message client, trying to define a HTTP message is just not really realistic or something. I can't remember what the complaints were, but he's out of there. And instead we have MWAP, who is well known from Zend.
Yeah, that was actually pretty huge, because anybody that knows, it's Matthew Wire-Affini or something like that. I'm going to fuck that name up myself. But he's kind of the legend of the PHP community. He's pretty much led all of the Zen framework efforts for years now. It's pretty cool to see him involved in the FIG.
Yeah, and he used to be involved in the FIG as well. He quit a while ago. His main reason was that he just hadn't got the time for it. And I can completely understand that. Like, I actually spent a month, it was a month ago, time tracking how much time I spent doing FIG stuff, and I realized that if I had built that, then I could have afforded rent. Yeah, he quit because he couldn't lead and he couldn't represent Zend, and he gave that to somebody else. But he's now come back as the author, as the editor for the PSR, so he doesn't have to be an official member or anything like that. He's just helping write it, and I'm still coordinating it. So he's come back, and we're making some changes. We're improving it, and we're going to try and get the HTTP message thing done. But he's coming at it from quite an interesting angle, which is he's been doing a lot of Node.js, and he has noticed that while they don't need standards in the Node community, because it's so much smaller, you just have Express and Happy. And they're two kind of HTTP layers that you can interact with in a similar way to Rack for Ruby. And he's noticed that they have those systems, and they have an interface for HTTP messages, requests and responses. So you can just build your application that talks, that builds up you can build an application that inspects the incoming request, and then you can build up the outgoing response, and you can kind of switch around between different systems, which you're actually using, but the message stays the same. And he's trying to do some of that for PHP. So it's going to be pretty much the same interface and the same idea, but he's just got that new approach. Because the last approach was being written by a guy who made a HTTP client. So his entire approach was, I have a HTTP client and I want to standardize this. And now we've got kind of the server side. So there's a bit of a battle going between the two approaches. But have you been?
So is there going to be? So before, kind of the idea was to have some sort of compatibility with Guzzle built in, right? Is that still a focus, or is Guzzle expected to play catch up?
So one of the problems is that Michael has already said that Guzzle won't use any standard that comes out of this, so that was a bit of a pain. But really,
that's a huge pain. Shit.
Yeah, I don't know why. I didn't really understand that. But the idea is that you are just building up a request, and then a client would send off that request. So theoretically, it would be an internal thing, and you can build up that request internally, or you could expose some of it in the client. I don't know if he's going to change anything. It definitely could change, because Michael on the show said that 5 would never exist, Guzzle 5 would never exist, and now Guzzle 5's been announced, so it could change in the future. Guzzle 6 could be, PSR compliant, but I'm much happier to ignore the implementations for now and just try and build the standard, because realistically, it's not about clients, and it's not about servers. It's about just building up that generic thing, right? I use the example of if you imagine two people are playing catch, one of them's a client and one of them's a server, and then the ball gets thrown around. It doesn't care which it's talking to. It's just a ball being thrown around, and that message is the ball, and it never changes depending on which way it's going. It's just here's a header, here's a status, here's a body, here's a whatever else. So we're trying to avoid adding support for cookies and support for reading JSON files and support for all this other stuff. and we're just trying to make it a really generic HTTP message that can be passed around. So a client can use it, a server can use it. It should be
Okay. All
generic.
right. That's cool. Well, I like the focus on generic because it seems like you can pretty quickly get into something too detailed to be used.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Especially if you look at cookies, they're quite shit. And you look at reading files. I mean, a file coming in could be the entire request could be a file. It could be like, here's a JPEG that I'm uploading with a MIME type. It could also, when you have like the multi-type headers, you split them out, and you have all this like really specific stuff because the HTTP specification is fucking huge. And if you start trying to build a PHP method that handles each single part of the entire HTTP specification, then you're going to be there for a very long time. I mean, you'd have to start supporting things like caching and proxy authentication and everything else. Whereas this is literally, so you've got the status, you've got the scheme, which is HTTP or HTTPS, the status code, the host, the URL, the headers, and the body, and that's it. And then what anyone chooses to do with that information, if they want to read it as JSON or pass the application form data out of there and take the chunks of post data out. You can do all of that stuff, but you'll do it by interfacing with the HTTP methods. So it might not sound wildly exciting, any of that stuff, but if you imagine working with Laravel as an example, if you've got this method where you're setting some headers and imagine you have a controller with a bunch of different methods, and each one of them is setting a few headers and returning bodies and everything else. If instead of interacting with Laravel specific requests and response data, you interface with PSR7, then you could take that entire controller and then just dump it into another framework if you change frameworks, and only have to change some of it. All of that HTTP request response stuff would still work in the exact same way.
Yeah, so where this, mostly the fixed stuff in general, but this kind of stuff is most exciting to me, is that like we had several kind of SOA architecture, different services, different systems set up differently, right? So if we need to move from one to the other, they might be completely different frameworks, or one might be a framework, one might not be a framework at all. It's really awesome to be able to just copy and paste code between them, or share a class between them in a submodule or something like that. So it really helps just the porting and interoperability there.
Yeah, man. Actually, an interesting conversation that me and Michael had was kind of one of those. It wasn't really an argument. It was a conversation where I completely understood every point he was making, and kind of wanted to agree with him but couldn't. And it's weird that the fig exists. And if you look at other languages, they don't have standards for how all of us can write our HTTP clients or how all of us can write our loggers, because they just have one logger that's really good, or they have a logger built in like Python does. And it's a really valid point. It's weird that we're doing this, but the point that I made in response was that in most of those communities, you do just have one good package. It's because most Python and Ruby, they are much smaller communities. The ones that do use it are much more vocal and much more cool and hip, so you kind of hear about it a lot. But PHP is fucking huge, and we have a lot of really bad code out there. Part of it being huge is that a large number of people out there are pretty terrible. But we have this massive community with loads of people making all this stuff, and you have like 10 options for logging and 10 options for ORMs, and there's all these hundreds of different things. Dependency injection containers. I can't talk today. All of these containers. There's like 25 of those as well. So there's somebody else trying to make a standard for working with dependency containers. So in a perfect world, PHP wouldn't need any of these standards. We'd just go, oh, that's a good package. We should all work with that package. That's a good requests library. We'll all use requests. But because there are 4 or 5 valid options for anything, and then like 20 shit ones, we can't do it. We can't leave it that way. We have to build these interfaces that allow us to kind of work with potentially multiple things. Just because otherwise, you've got like 10 different HTTP clients in your code, and it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and a lot of the other languages too don't really mind breaking backwards compatibility. But that's always been a really huge thing for PHP. So Python and Ruby, they they pretty much tell you to fuck off between version numbers, right? But PHP really cares about, we have 20-year-old code out there and we want it to still work when we can. And it's a big thing. I mean, it's a lot of the reason why huge stable companies use it still.
Yeah, that's true, and that's something that a lot of people forget about when they talk about kind of these PSR interfaces, and they say, well, it's not like I just randomly change my logger every 5 minutes. No, no, no. And it's not really what we're talking about. I mean, you might someday, you might not right now, but you might. But a lot of it is if you build your code around, let's just say that Guzzle was compliant with PSR. You've got your HTTP client and you've built it specifically to rely on curl on Guzzle, sorry. And then you build it around version 3, and then they release version 4. It's got a whole different name. All the classes are moved around, and then the methods are different, right? So even using the same HTTP client, you have to actually recode a large amount of your app just to work with Guzzle, the latest version of the same package. So if you're PSR compliant, to whatever standard, logging, whatever, and then you make a new version of your application and you're still PSR compliant, your code's still going to work. So it's not just about like randomly changing your components out like you change your underwear. It's more about like, you know for a fact that shit's always going to work even when, you know, versions change, and that's pretty powerful, especially.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, so what's next on our list here?
I don't know. What do we got here?
I lost the list completely, so I'm hoping you still have the list.
I've got the list. Vert PHP. Have you done anything with this? Have you used RBenv or RVMC or?
Yeah, so I use RBM now. I've used what's the other fucking one? The old one.
RBenv.
No, that's the one I use now, I think. What's the old one?
You don't use RVM.
Oh, I thought you were saying the same thing. You fucking Englishman. Every word sounds the same.
There's RBENV and RVM.
Alright, so I used to use RVM. I now use RBENV.
Okay. Yeah, same.
Cool.
Right.
Right. So it's pretty fucking similar. It's the same idea, right?
Yeah. So for people that don't really understand, sorry, that sounded really patronizing. For people that don't know what we're talking about,
for all you fucking dumbasses watching our show,
for all you losers that don't know Ruby yet, God. So most other languages have this concept of being able to install multiple versions of the language and switch between them and that sort of thing. PHP, we talked about a tool called Virt PHP, V-I-R-T for virtual, on the show a little while ago. And I hadn't used it a huge amount at that point. I kind of played around with it. I've been playing around with it more now, and I'm starting to be a big fan. But it is still alpha, and I've had to send a few pull requests, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, something I've been kind of thinking about recently is how much I enjoy not having to use Vagrant, which is something that a lot of people get really confused about. Because I spent a little bit of time saying like, oh, Vagrant's really cool, and when you need it, it's a really great tool. And everyone took the when you need it part out of that and just said like, we should use Vagrant all the time for everything. And it's often like not the appropriate tool. If you think about a basic HTTP service, you've got Laravel, which has got a built-in server that sits on top of the PHP server, and you can write all your code, and you can use the file cache instead of the Redis cache driver locally, and you can talk to SQLite instead of Postgres locally, and you can actually you can completely break dev prod parity and actually do it surprisingly successfully. So I really like using something called PHP Brew, which helps you install multiple versions of PHP, and then Virt PHP that says you basically set up a sandbox. So you pick.
So it's like this project is going to be sandboxed to this version of PHP.
Yeah, I wanted to move away from saying this project because it doesn't have the same idea. With RVM, if you CD into a folder, it says, oh, it notices a file that says, oh, this is my app, and then it sets up the sandbox around that. With Virt PHP, you kind of type a command to activate it, and then wherever you go on your system, you're still using that version. So that's a bit different, and it's a bit confusing. And we're kind of trying. I've been talking to them about changing it, so you have like a requirements file in there. So you know, you can type one command. It looks for the file that's in your folder, in the folder you're in now, and says, okay, I know which environment I'm meant to be. I know which packet extensions I'm meant to have.
Yeah, I really prefer that. I kind of do the same thing Vert does with homemade brew scripts. It's really horrible.
Yeah,
But it's pretty frustrating though. Like I'm in one project and hey, I got a call with an error or whatever, and I CD over to that, and then oh shit, I'm in the wrong version of PHP and have to redo all that. You know?
yeah, and that's exactly it. Like when I was using Vagrant a lot more, I was working on projects that, to be honest, they did need Vagrant. Some of them really did need Vagrant because we had to get it very specific. But there were a lot of other projects that didn't really need it, and it's just really frustrating when you're in one project, you've got one VM running, and then you have to go and work on another project, and you leave both of them running, and it's slow as fuck. Or even if you close it down and you have like 10 of these projects, and you've got all of these virtual machine files dotted around that take up half your hard drive, and but there's just a lot of stuff and nonsense that goes with it, especially if your Vagrant box you accidentally let it provision, and then it like does some chef bollocks, and I've had so many random problems with provisioning stuff that I just get really frustrated. So if you're working on like one project a lot, having Vagrant and having it all provisioned nicely and everything else, it's really cool. But if you can avoid all of that stuff because you're just making like a basic API or something, then it's quite fun to just skip all that shit and just type like vert PHP create my app, and then peckle install Mongo if you're using Mongo for some reason.
Why would you ever use Mongo?
I don't know, because Jeremy McCullough made me do it. I don't know.
There's also dev null included with most Linux-based systems.
Yeah.
Just as reliable.
I like that. That's good. We should write a driver so you can store things in dev null. But yeah, it's a really cool project, and you guys should check it out. Like, I really feel like the PHP community, especially the Laravel community, it went from we have no idea what Vagrant is to we should use Vagrant all the time for everything. And the number of people I talk to that are just trying to get into PHP development and they're having Vagrant forced down their throat, I'm like, no, leave this poor guy alone. Just you want to have a couple of, use PHP brew so that you can say PHP brew install 5.5 and then 5.6, and then you can like switch between the two and see if your application works. You can run your unit tests on PHP 5.5 and make sure everything works, and then install 5.6.1. It came out today, I think. And then run your unit tests again, and then you can see if your tests work. That's a really powerful thing. And then vert PHP sits on top of that, and then you can, install this specific version of a packet extension that you might need to make sure your tests work there, and then you can install a later version in a different environment and switch between those two and see how things work. And you can do all of that without having to like use Chef to provision a Vagrant box that takes 25 minutes to run. And it's a cool thing, I think. Have you worked with it at all?
Yeah, I played around with it. I like it. Like I said, I do something very similar with just brew scripts that I wrote, and it's it's really awesome to be able to just switch projects and then change your version and shit like that. Really nice.
Sweet. How long have we been talking? What's going on with our life here?
30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe. Oh no.
Done.
We talked for a long time before we hit play, so I'm not sure what's going on now.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. Oh, me and Taylor got into another argument. We actually argued on the way here.
All right, so I caught a little bit of this on Twitter, right? So
Yeah.
Taylor thinks you should use frameworks all the time for everything.
Pretty much. I mean, so there's another podcast called PHP Roundtable, and the guy from that is trying to have a discussion about when you should use a framework and when, if ever, is it appropriate to just use a couple of composer packages instead. And obviously I'm on the side of like I'm all about components with as few dependencies as possible that are interoperable that you can use to achieve goals, right? And Taylor, funnily enough, is all about you should probably just use Laravel or another framework that does everything. But there aren't any as good as mine, so just use mine.
Surprise!
Right. I feel like for the last year, like me and the Laravel guys have bashed heads a couple of times over the last year. The first one was literally January 1st. And And I feel like every single argument we've had could be boiled down to, hi, I'm Phil. I'm on the framework interoperability team. I put a lot of work into into improving standards so the whole community can come together and work on things together by sharing code and sharing resources. And then the Laravel folks like Ian and Taylor are, we make Laravel and we think you should always use Laravel, and we don't care if you're building components we don't care if you want our components to work outside of Laravel because you should just fucking use Laravel. Uh,
Yeah, so
that's
I was actually talking to Lee Tingham about this a little bit
yeah.
a couple days ago. So personally, I really like Laravel. I was one of the first adopters of the Laravel 4, as you were, right?
Yeah.
I was right behind you using it on one of
I was
those
gonna
first
say
projects,
behind.
right?
I was first. I was first.
You were first. All right. It's a competition.
Yeah, no, I'm being silly, but
I know. Anyway, so I'm a big fan of it, right? I use it for most of the side projects I do. Or, if I have a fun idea I want to knock out on a weekend, I'm
yeah,
going to pick Laravel, right? It's pretty fast, easy to get going. But when I look at something for like business use, something I want my team to use, I tend to shy away from Laravel because I know that in 2 years my needs are going to be very different than my needs are today, and I can't anticipate what those needs will be. But I do know that if I pick something that's very proprietary, something that doesn't play well with others, I'll regret that later. So I would rather have a little bit of pain now for, say, everyone to learn Symfony or to roll it from scratch so that later everything kind of plays nice with what's new out there. Everything's, very interoperable to take your word from your group, right? But it's worth the pain now for the compatibility later. Whereas if you go all in on a framework, you pretty much have to stay on that framework. And it's not
yeah,
always the case with Laravel, but with a lot of frameworks, once you go in all in on a framework, you have to fucking stay on that same version, or at least on that same major version. Because
yeah.
like Symfony, going from 1 to 2, you might as well just restart it all over, right?
Oh,
It's
absolutely. Yeah,
a pretty
that
big
was a
deal.
meaningful change. Yeah, that's a lot of the thing. I mean, the argument that the always use a framework teams have is if you're in a large if you're on a team and you're developing stuff, there's it's much better to have, and there's lots of juniors on your team. It's much better to have something like Laravel where they can there is only one way of doing specific things, and that way is documented in their documentation. So you wanna do it. If you're using a framework like Laravel, then everyone knows how that's going to work because they can find out very quickly. And if you have juniors, that juniors can, unless they just break stuff because it's, I can't explain this point. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So I can totally explain this point because this is something I do consider. So let's say I'm trying to onboard new people or have junior devs on the team. It's a lot easier to say, hey, this is this app I need your help maintaining. These are the docs for the framework. If you read the framework docs, you'll pretty much know how to use the app.
Right.
Versus saying, hey, this is the app, and here are the 5 packages it uses, and here is the documentation. By the way, I had the best wife ever. I was just delivered 2 beers.
Brilliant.
Anyway, all right. So it's a lot easier to say, hey, here's the framework docs. It all works together. It all works pretty much in the same way. Go read up on these docs when you have a problem. Here's this one place you reference. It all kind of, goes hand in hand. It's a really easy place for someone to just go back and check things, and you get help for. So, if you have a problem with the app, you can pretty easily find the support forums for that or whatever. Versus if you're using independent packages, it kind of lends itself more towards more senior developers or at least mid-range, because it's a lot harder for your junior to figure out how these 5 packages are interacting together. There's no real help to figure out how they interface. You can only go back and find help for each individual package. It
Yeah.
really does bump up the complexity level, but it also does help with your compatibility and your integration issues later. So it's always kind of the balancing act of, okay, I might have juniors now, but in a year they're probably not going to be juniors anymore if I do my job right.
Right.
But also you have to think about your churn, because of what we're doing. Say you're like a marketing company or an agency, you might churn through developers pretty often. In that case, that's just kind of your MO. No one stays at a marketing company very long as a developer usually, right?
Yeah.
So you might just have to plan for the fact that every 2 years you're changing developers. In that case, a framework with good docs is probably your best choice.
Yeah. That's exactly where I am as well. If I'm working on a project for me, then I'll just use whatever the crap I feel like using that week, because who cares? It's my project. Um, if I'm working on a client project, and whether it's like a 2 weeks or 3 months, like I'm probably going to end up using a framework, probably Laravel for that, because as long as they're okay with it, because chances of them having um, if you're offloading your code base to somebody else, it's much easier to say, this is a Laravel app. If you need to know how Laravel works, there's all this fucking information. Go and Google it. Go and get on Stack Overflow. You'll be fine. You don't need to come back to me. But if I build some custom thing and it's it's a large application and it's got like 25 different packages that I've taped together somehow. If I give that to somebody and I haven't spent like a month writing documentation for it, then they're going to have a pretty bad time. So if you're dumping the code, it can be pretty handy to use the framework as well. But it also depends. I mean, I've in the past with a piece of a little bit that me and Taylor agreed on was that if you're building like a trivial app, like a little tiny HTTP service that just like reads some shit from the database and then just throws it out to JSON, then that might be a perfect instance of when you just use a couple of packages. And I've done that freelance before. I've just done, here's a big Laravel app over here, and then here's this tiny little HTTP service that sits there. And that was like OrnoDI, a dependency injection container, Nikita's fast route, which is a really cool routing API, and then like the composer autoloader, and that was it. And it had like PDO enabled and that. So that I didn't need to write a month's worth of documentation because it was like 3 files. But yeah, on the whole, there's no steadfast rule for yes, you should always use a framework. No, you should never use a framework because they're slow. What does slow mean? It really depends on who are the team that are building it now. How long are you building it for? Are you concerned about the framework that you use changing itself regularly? A lot of people are currently scared about Laravel 5, even though they probably shouldn't be. And who's the team that's going to be maintaining it? So the team that build it and the team that maintain it aren't always the same people. And these are all the sort of factors you have to weigh up. And obviously performance is a fairly relevant thing. Not that I kind of said a minute ago, like frameworks are slow. I mean, they can be depending on what you're doing. Development time is quicker often. Performance time can be slower. And when I made that service, I originally wrote that service as Laravel, and the response time was like 350 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds somewhere, and it was just calling a raw SQL query from Postgres, dumping it out and on the page and making it JSON, and that was like 300 to 400 milliseconds. And I rewrote it with OrnoDI, Composer Autoloader, and Nikita's fast route, and it was like 50 milliseconds. So that's a really big difference. So sometimes not using a framework completely makes sense based on developer speed, developer skill, developer whatever the fuck. But it also makes a lot of sense about performance. There's a lot of factors that go into it.
Yeah, I think there's also been there's been a bad stigma around performance with people that haven't been in those shoes. So if you do kind of your blog or your brochureware or whatever kind of site that's kind of traditional, you have models, views, and controllers all in one thing, right? Performance of the framework is probably very negligible, depending on anything else you're doing. But if you're doing services, huge.
Yeah.
If you're writing an API, especially, or just any kind of service that's been being used, especially if it's like locally be used. We do a lot of that with Node, so like different things will include this and use it locally on the server, so you don't have to worry about HTTP speeds. And performance is a huge thing for that, because a 300 millisecond API versus a 50 millisecond API,
yeah,
it's a world of difference. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
This is the exact reason that for years I've been saying that Hello World benchmarks aren't useless, and I've caught a lot of flack for that from fucking idiots on Reddit, which is why I don't go there anymore. But and people all over the place have said that they're useless and they're stupid and they don't prove anything. A Hello World benchmark is literally you output Hello World to the screen using a framework, and you see how long that took. A lot of people say they're useless because they say developer speed is more important than performance speed most of the time, or whatever, which isn't. You can't make an absolute comment like that. That's ridiculous to say. Or they complain that
Maybe if you're a startup with 500 $1 million and you have
Exactly.
servers to match, maybe, but there's still performance there that you can't
Right.
get back.
That's what I say about it's not an absolute, right? It depends on what you're doing. If you're like a tiny startup and you have to get this launched immediately before you get any money, then you don't care about performance as much as you care about developer speed. But at the same time, if your app has something that has to be fucking real time and it's slow as shit, then you probably do care about performance. So again, it's the same like three people I'm talking about a lot of the time that are making all of these like absolute statements, and they're completely fucking idiotic absolute statements. But no, the benefit of a Hello World benchmark is that you get to find out what the framework is doing in the background. They say like, oh, well, Symfony is much slower to get started, but then once it's up, then its ORM is quicker than whatever, something else. And that's completely irrelevant. Don't care. I want to know how quick it is at starting up, right? It's like trying to work out if you're watching Top Gear, something they will tell you is how fast that car goes from 0 to 60. I don't give a shit how comfortable the seats are. I don't care how quick it gets to 100 or 120. I want to know how quickly it gets to 60. That's the acceleration rate. That's one metric, and that one metric alone doesn't say whether that car is better or worse or like quicker in general. I just want to know what the acceleration rate is, and it could be that we've all played Mario Kart. We know that some people have slower acceleration but higher top speed, and that's another metric. But the Hello World benchmark really lets you know how quickly that little bit of stuff will happen. And when you have something like Laravel or Symfony or Zen Framework, you find that the overhead of just kicking up, just boosting up the framework itself, can add around 200 or 250 milliseconds on top of any request, just because that framework's there. Before you can even just output the string hello world, you've lost 200 milliseconds just on it being there. And a lot of the time, that's fine. It could well be that your MySQL queries, you could knock 200 milliseconds off those and save the day. But again, a lot of the time it's not, and a lot of the time it's good to know that. And because everyone freaks out about Hello World benchmarks, no one ever really knows what they are. So people just pick a framework that looks pretty or that has the best marketing terms and go with it, and then realize, oh, this is actually kind of slow. Shit.
Yeah, I mean, anytime someone says absolutes, it's not a good idea, right? So it either means they
Apart
have
from that one.
it means either they have an agenda or they don't have varying experiences. So, like, I recommend to most dads, like, try to freelance something when you can, because especially when you freelance, you see so many different problems that you never would have seen just working one job at a time. And I don't know, I think that's why I value a lot of these things differently than I would if I hadn't, because, you know, if you work on 10 different, completely different companies and products over a year, you're going to get a real feel for how different things can be.
Yeah. I wrote an article about that a while ago, and I can't remember what it was called because I've written too many bloody articles, but the whole point was depending on the type of developer you are, and the type of job that you're doing and the type of jobs you've done previously and when you did them, you have completely different expectations of how other PHP developers are. An example of that is if you work for a massive corporation that that is still stuck on PHP 5.3, then you're going to be a lot more interested in backwards compatibility. You're going to be interested in components, keeping their dependencies much lower for PHP versions. There's all these crazy different things that come into play. If you're a freelancer, then you can probably use newer, cooler technologies and then just explain to your client why they should use them. If you work for, you can work as like a freelancer or as a contractor or as a junior developer for a huge company or a startup, and all of these things are completely fucking different. And if you only work as one of them and you work the same way all the time, then your idea of what the PHP world is or should be is going to be very different to mine, which might be somewhere completely different. And it's because I've worked every single level of those jobs that I can very easily see how these things kind of fit together. So people that work for a marketing company that always use Laravel for everything and have always built their apps with Laravel and it works perfectly fine for them because everyone there knows Laravel, that's great. There are loads of other companies that work in completely different ways, and I feel like I'm making that point quite badly.
No, that's good. I mean, basically, too long didn't read is we're right, everyone else is wrong.
That's how it usually works. Yeah. No, my argument with these people mostly is you know this one way in which things work, and that's not accurate. And my argument is usually I know 5 ways in which this works, so that gives me 4 more reasons why I might be right than you are. And there's somebody else that might know 10 other different approaches. But I think there's too many people that they just kind of have their way of working and they try to smash that way onto everyone else. And then they don't notice that other people do things differently. And that's
Yeah, I
really
mean, it's easy to get in that too. So, like, if I work a certain way or a certain thing for a while, it's easy to take on a new project and just automatically say, I'm going to do it this way because this is what I'm used to and this works well.
right.
But it's, over the years, hopefully, or just, you fuck up enough and you realize maybe I should think about this from a higher level when you take on a project. Maybe the last way isn't the best way.
Yeah. You get these people that like, I'm switching from code editor to Laravel, or I'm switching from PHP to Python. I'm like, what does that really mean? You mean that right now you use PHP for every project you do, and then from this point on, now that you've switched, you're going to use Python for every project you do? That sounds fucking terrible.
Yeah.
What are you doing? We can't just like pick a favorite stick and then just bash every single project with that stick. It's not.
There's actually a recent article by T.J. Hawleychuk, the guy who pretty much wrote every Node package ever. It was basically I'm leaving Node for, I don't even know what he left it for, Scala or Go or something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was thinking the whole time. It's like, you're leaving Node, even though it doesn't even necessarily occupy the same space as Go. I mean, you're solving different problems with each language, right? So
yeah.
It seems really fucking weird to leave a language at all.
Yeah.
Like, I would still totally use, I don't know, C# and .NET if I needed to make a Windows app. I haven't used it in years, but I never left the language, right? It's the best solution for certain problems.
Right. But I feel like that's what I keep screaming. It's like, use the right tool for the right job. Don't try and pick one thing and always do it that way. Don't assume that your one approach or your one tool or your one thing is always the best thing, because, as we've said, generalizations are shit, and so many people make them. I've heard a lot of people say that in the PHP community there's this really big focus on finding the one right way to do it, and then arguing about which the right way to do everything is, and then it's just not possible. And embarrassingly, I am involved with a project called PHP the Right Way, and I'm involved with standardization groups that say do it this way. But both of those projects, there's a bit of a nuance there. With PHP the Right Way, we never say this is the only way you should do something. We say, here are a couple of ways of doing it that are good, and here is a really fucking terrible way. Don't use that terrible way, right? We explain the benefits of MySQLi and the benefits of PDO, and then say definitely don't use the old MySQL package because that shit's going to be removed really soon. So there isn't like one true way. There's probably a couple of good ways of doing things that you might not have thought of, and there's probably a few really shit ways, and you shouldn't do it the shit way. But just the whole generalization approach is pissing me off.
We need a PHP the shit way, so you can make sure you're not using that.
Yeah, we should just rename it to that.
No, I mean, we would just redo it, but
Cool.
we would recommend that you use MySQLi or whatever.
Call it PHP fuck no, and then just change it. Yeah.
All right, I think we're about done in time. Anything else?
No, that's it. Apart from you should. No, I'm too tired to make jokes today. Let's go. Call it a day.
All right. Thanks for joining, everyone. It's been fun. Catch you next time when we hopefully have guests. We'll see.
Bye.